Today, Bridget and Joey from Restored Ministries share how they met, the biggest areas that children of divorce struggle with, and practical ways to heal if you come from a broken family.
We met in college. Bridget asked me out on a date, and I said yes, and then we dated, and then she asked me to marry her, and I said yes. No, that's not exactly how it happened. We did meet in college. We worked a similar job and just kind of became friends that way. And then toward the end of our senior year, I asked Bridget out on a date. We went to like our senior dance together, and then went on a few dates right at the tail end before we went separate ways. I'm from Chicago. She's from Philadelphia, so not near each other. And so we didn't really know what would happen. To be honest, with our relationship, we weren't quite in a relationship, but had gone on dates. And so we stayed in touch over the summer. I actually went to Italy to teach English for 2 months. And so we thought maybe that distance from, Philadelphia to Italy would kind of make us grow apart, where we actually grew stronger through that. I came back. We started our relationship and then dated for a year-long distance, and I can kind of fill in the blanks later. But yeah, that was how we met at Franciscan University.
So the first time I remember seeing Joey, we didn't talk, but we played volleyball against each other.
That's right.
He was super outgoing, super friendly. I could tell he was super driven. And he was super easy to talk to. We got along pretty well. So yeah, that was my first impression.
Yeah, on my end, I kind of forgot. Yeah, we played volleyball. We actually, both our teams got to the championship game playing each other. And this might be a sore subject, but we beat Bridget's team. And so, but I never really met her then. And so it wasn't until later. Through that, I knew she was athletic. And then I knew that she was into ministry because on campus at Franciscan University, she led this thing called women's ministry. I worked for men's ministry. And so that was it's kind of a natural fit to now do family ministry together. No, I'm just kidding. I knew that she had a heart for serving other people. That was one of the qualities I was looking for in a spouse, for sure. And so kind of hit it off on that front. But I think we both come from pretty big families too. So we kind of talked about that, I think, early on as well. So kind of got that good impression too. But yeah, definitely was attracted to her in multiple ways and admired her too. So the first time was actually to our senior dance. So I guess we sometimes consider that the first date, sometimes don't. So I'll go through all the things. I texted her asking if I could come by. She had an apartment with a few roommates, and I asked her if I could come by. What was it, a week before the dance or something? It was kind of late.
Yeah, it was a Monday night.
Yeah, it was kind of late. I didn't even know if I was going to go to the dance. And anyway, long story short, I texted her, "Hey, can I come by?" And then I came by, and then we were kind of talking on her front porch. I asked you to the dance, right? And then she said yes, and that was, yeah.
It was fun. It was in Pittsburgh. It was on a river on a boat. So it was our unofficial first date.
Yeah, it was a really fun time. A couple of days later,
You asked me out on a date.
Yeah, which we kind of debate whether I should have waited that long or not, because I left you kind of guessing. Anyway, I kind of wanted to give it a little bit of time after that dance, and then that date was we had a little picnic. Essentially, there was a park nearby that we went to. And, it was cool. We were next to a river, and there were some hiking trails, and we hung out there. Do you remember how I asked you on that? I don't even remember.
I think I came over your house and we were talking over wine, and you asked me out.
Okay, with friends. Was that? Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, so that was the first official date. There were a few dates after that, and then when I came back from Italy, kind of a long story, but my family would go on this vacation/retreat in Ohio, and Bridget actually joined us. At this point, we had gone on dates, but weren't technically dating, so we were these special friends. And so she came and met my whole family and a bunch of the people that I had grown up with. So it was a really audacious thing to do, brave thing to do. I don't know if I would have been brave enough to do the same. But anyway, it was after that retreat vacation with my family. I went back to visit her family in Philadelphia. Yeah, one night went to this lake nearby, which we actually don't live far from now. And that's where I asked her to be my girlfriend. I had some flowers, and I had asked her dad permission before that too.
Did you both want to get married before you met each other?
Yes. Yeah, I was pretty certain. I had discerned a little bit in college, just thinking about maybe doing religious life, but my senior year, I would say I was pretty certain I wanted to get married and go that route.
And I was as well. At the tail end of high school, discern priesthood, religious life, there was an order I actually spent a little bit of time with. And anyway, they were great. But when I went to live with them for a bit, and through that experience, it became pretty clear that I wasn't called to religious life, at least. And so I kind of still had priesthood in the back of my mind and kind of thought and prayed through that. It's kind of a longer story, but through college that I think that God was calling me to marriage. It was something I wanted, but I was afraid of it and didn't really know how to go about building healthy marriage.
What was making you like really afraid of getting married?
Yeah, Bridget was just really intimidating. When I was about 11 years old, my parents separated and later got divorced, and just brought a lot of pain and problems into my life. And one of the effects it had on me was just being really afraid of love and marriage, because I thought, if this is where love leads, if this is where marriage leads, like, why in the world would I want to put myself through that hell, through that pain? And so I swore to myself, like probably fresh into high school, that I would never get married. And then over the years, started to see that no, marriage actually can be good and beautiful. I still had a lot to work through, but yeah, that was like really it. And then when I started dating, I felt incompetent at it. I felt lost, like I didn't really know what I was doing, because I never really saw, at least in my immediate family, because our parents' marriage is the relationship that we know best. And so whether we know it or not, we've like kind of caught a lot of their example, both the virtues and the vices, I would say. I, was definitely afraid of kind of repeating that cycle of divorce and dysfunction, and wanted better, but I didn't know how to do that. And so I think that's what really made me afraid. I was afraid of being vulnerable and trusting, and kind of my disposition was more to love at arm's length because of all of that. And so that doesn't really make a good recipe for like building intimacy and love. And so I had a lot to work through, and thankfully had some amazing mentors and just a lot of different healing experiences over the years, especially in college. But yeah, that was at the core of it, is I like didn't want to repeat that cycle. I felt like I couldn't build love that lasted.
I'm sorry you had to go through that.
No, thank you. Yeah. And sadly, I'm not alone. Here in America, according to our U.S. Census, they say that every year there's over 1 million American children who go through their parents' divorce, and they define child as anyone 17 years old and younger. But there was a ton of research done on this, and they found that the biggest area of life where you tend to struggle if you come from a divorced family is actually in your relationships, especially romantic relationships and marriage. And sadly, so often they end up repeating that cycle of dysfunction and divorce in their own lives. Now, it doesn't have to be that way, but so often, unless there's like healing and building virtue, you can end up going down that path.
Bridget, were you picking up on these fears that Joey had when you were dating?
Yeah, good question. I think so. We had talked about it. He was open with me, I would say, gradually about his past and what happened and how it was affecting him. But he was also proactive in telling me, how he was working on the fears that he had about marriage. I felt pretty confident, even right up until we got engaged, that he was going to be someone that, even though he had been through something like this wasn't going to be a problem, that he did really believe in the vows that you say to each other, and that, yeah, he wasn't going to run away. And that I think what he went through actually helped strengthen our own marriage. And I think a lot of that has to be contributed to all of the hard work that he did go through. So,
did you ever have to tell him this isn't like a good way to react to this situation?
I think in all of us, we have like triggers. And I think some of them I have experienced, nothing crazy. Yeah, I think Joey was very well formed and before we met each other. And so there wasn't like a major fear in him or any event that happened that he kind of maybe freaked out at. So no, thankfully I didn't really have to bring him back to reality. We had good friends. I think that's huge. Shout out to Franciscan University. I think a lot of our friends, not all, of them came from maybe like intact families, but I think a lot of us had examples of what a healthy family life looked like. And so we were surrounded by even the professors at school and their families. We were surrounded by a lot of them. They were all great examples. And then also the classes we took in college, theology, philosophy classes. So I was a nursing major, and even with nursing, you got to take, theology classes. And I think you just got a well-rounded formation there too.
Definitely super blessed. Didn't really earn this by any means, but there were just a lot of good mentors in my life. I remember between like priests and like religious and just good men and families and people who, are faith. For me, there were two families in particular that were really formative, the Cheathams and the Cullers, and they really just portrayed like what a Catholic marriage and family like should look like. They truly loved each other. They had like a romantic love too, like that was alive and well. I can imagine it was flaming at every moment, but they kept it alive, which was really beautiful, even amid having a lot of kids and the stress of just life in general. And so that was really pivotal for me, especially in overcoming that fear I mentioned, is they kind of like contradicted, or there were evidence against what I thought that love and marriage, no matter how good they are, maybe at the time, they eventually crash and burn. They were the exact opposite.
What would you say to anyone who's listening who comes from a broken family?
I could totally understand. Like your fear makes sense to me. I guess the challenge would be, is that the only path that's available? Are you doomed to go down that path, even if the statistics say that you're more likely to get divorced? Or is it possible that you could have a beautiful marriage? And I would also say, if you don't even know what that looks like, if you haven't seen it, seek that out. Like ask God to bring couples, families into your life that portray that. And so I would say find them, get close to them. Don't maybe walk up to them randomly after Mass on Sunday and say, hey, can I like study your marriage? But maybe befriend them and talk to them, like whether it's at church or somewhere else, and maybe try to be useful to them too. If you really want to spend time with them, maybe go see if you could help babysit or help with a project around the house, or, in the case of a woman, like maybe ask the wife if you can like get coffee with her and like get some advice on something. The hundreds, if not more, young people that we've spoken to through my apostolate, we've heard a clear, resounding trend that spending time with good, healthy marriages and families like is incredibly healing. Because again, it breaks that idea that all marriages like are unhappy or will end in divorce. And they also kind of are a role model. They model what you need to do in order to have the same. It's so easy to run from that fear. When we feel fear, we go in the opposite direction. And what I would actually say is actually push into that. Like, why are you afraid? If this thing were to go horribly wrong, like what would it look like? What would happen? And then what can you do to prevent that from happening? And there are very clear things you can do. And most of all, like God's grace can give you the ability to build a really beautiful love, but also you can use your will to just choose to love and to never give up. And I would say another thing too that was helpful for me, and basically I'm just sharing from experience here, is just learning how to love in friendships, especially if you come from a broken family and you're just like very wary of any sort of love and intimacy. Then learning in kind of safe friendships is the best place to start, because again, you learn vulnerability, you learn how to trust, you learn how to, just be there for a friend. Final thing I would say too is like, make sure you're bringing this all to God first and foremost. He's the safest relationship, and he's going to help you more than your friends can, more than your future spouse can, more than any mentor can, even though I think that's like really, really important too. So often like we have these fears and we kind of like shove them in the back of our minds. We don't think about them, talk about them, but you really need to push into them and like examine them and kind of dissect them and talk about them and try to, make them smaller than they seem. Because in our heads, they seem really big. But once you kind of get them out of your head, whether that's writing it on paper or just talking again with like a mentor or spiritual director, you can make them seem much smaller than they feel. The only way to overcome fear, I should say, is to walk through it. And the antidote to fear is action. If you don't fully have it figured out when it comes to love, relationships, dating, just try. Put one foot in front of the other and just try to love again. But it might feel weird. You might not feel fully competent, know what you're doing. But that action, that bravery of like pushing into it is going to be so, so helpful. And eventually you'll look up and you'll be like, wow, I've actually built this virtue of like being able to love and build like a healthy relationship. And when you overcome fear, you feel free. And that freedom that can then be used to love further.
What's your engagement story?
So I was coming home. I was just babysitting at my sister-in-law's, which is funny because she knew I was going to get engaged that afternoon and we had talked about it. But I walked in, I was living at my parents' house, and I walked in and there's flowers and a note for me. And basically told me to get dressed up and follow the next clue. So there's a couple clues. It went to a lake where we spent a lot of time. There's a clue there, like under a picnic bench. And then eventually it led to a church where we would go many days for daily mass. It's the National Shrine of Our Lady of Czestochowa, which we love. So I walked in and he had gotten someone to open the gate at the front of the church. And it's a beautiful chapel. It's a replica of the chapel in Poland. So he was up there. I think were you wearing a suit?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you were wearing a suit. He had flowers for me. And I think a lot of women understand this, but you kind of blank out what they say. I just remember he got down on one knee and I was tearing up. So I couldn't even see the ring.
It was dark in there too.
It was dark in there too. But I joked that I said yes without seeing the ring. But it was beautiful. The whole day was beautiful. So yeah, that was awesome. And then we got some pictures and then we went back to your place.
But yeah, I had this whole little speech prepared, and then I learned later that Bridget like didn't pay attention to any of it.
No, I paid attention. You just forget it after.
Because it's overwhelming. But
I
had 2 roses, and I gave one to you, and then I think I might have given one to Our Lady. But it was a beautiful experience, and definitely
exhausting.
Yeah, there's just so much planning like that goes into it.
But then afterwards, you're calling all of your family, some of my friends. So it's quite a long day.
Yeah, and that's one tip for everyone listening. Maybe like don't call everyone right away. And maybe call the people who mean the most to you, or if you can see them in person, even better. And then probably just post on social media or something.
Bridget, can you tell us your reasons why you wanted to marry Joey?
Yeah, good question. I would say he's a driven guy. And so that was something that was super attractive to me. I think during our relationship, even early on when we were dating, he was very intentional. I kind of knew every step of the way what he was thinking. And I think our communication was good early on about that. He's athletic. He likes sports, which I like sports. So that was definitely something that I needed in a husband. What else? I think his faith.
I'm just kidding.
No. I think his faith was definitely super impressed me. Being raised Catholic, I wanted to marry someone else who was Catholic and someone who knew the faith, but also lived the faith out. That was really important to me. And someone who also cared about other people. I just remember the way that he talked about his siblings and how much he loved his siblings and his family. I really love that about him too.
This question is for Joey. What has been the biggest surprise of being married? Something that maybe you didn't expect coming from a broken home?
I think, I don't know if it's quite a surprise, but just how you just don't have to do the same things your parents did. Your parents often, like, they just want better for you than they had, especially if the marriage was really broken. So I think that is a cool thing. And more practically, what that looks like is that you can actually resolve conflict. You don't have to like yell and scream at each other and then like part ways and never resolve anything. You could actually resolve things. You can apologize. You can be humble. Like, you can actually do all that. You're not going to be perfect at it. You might screw it up. I know I have. And so I think that's been kind of surprising how like we all, at one level, want healthy marriages. We want great marriages. But that's the results of the hard work that you put in. It's the result of the actions that you take. It's like it doesn't show up on your doorstep in a prime box. You really need to work at it. And then I think another thing is when you have kids, especially, your heart expands. Like you kind of think that maybe you can never love more than you do in that moment. God can actually make your heart bigger and you can love more. There's a lot of areas of struggle when it comes to marriage if you come from a broken family. Truly, we were poorly trained in how to love. And so we really need to relearn how to love. John Paul II said the family is a school of love. And so within our families, we learn how to love, how to build relationships, how to learn how to trust and communicate, all the things that go into relationships. But not all training and love is made equal, right? Some people learn better how to love than others. Spend time around people who are doing it better than you are. That's how you become better at anything, whether it's in business, in music, in school. And there's some data that actually says like you'll end up making the same amount of money as your closest 5 friends, which is really interesting. And so I think we could probably make the jump and say there's something similar about like you'll probably have maybe the same quality relationship and marriage as maybe the 5 closest people to you. There's also the idea that divorce can be contagious. And before you just abandon your divorced friend, you can still love them, of course, but there's kind of an interesting idea that you want to surround yourself with people who can, who are good for you. And so I've heard it said that your friends are like elevators. They either take you up or take you down. And so it's really important to surround yourself with really, really good people. And there's so many problems that can come about when it comes to coming from a broken family. The main 3 kind of buckets that we put the problems into are emotional problems like anxiety, depression, loneliness, anger, suicidal kind of feelings or thoughts can kind of fall into that bucket too. The second area would be bad habits. When you go through a lot of pain in life, when you go through trauma, we all, as humans, we want to feel good when we feel bad. And so we look at ways of numbing the pain and feeling better. And so often, there's healthy ways to do that, but so often we resort to the unhealthy ways, whether that's porn or drinking too much or binge shopping or like scrolling on social endlessly, and the list goes on. And so those bad habits can really take hold of us and can really destroy our ability to love, especially pornography and any sort of lust. Like pornography is the perfect way to shoot your future marriage in the head because it destroys your ability to love. It destroys your capacity to love. And it just teaches you how to use a person for your own pleasure, but not truly will their good. Choose what's best for them. And so that's a second area, bad habits. And then the third area that we see a lot of people struggling in, like I had mentioned, is relationship struggles, whether it's in friendships, like struggling to be vulnerable, to trust, to kind of open up, to learn to rely on other people. And then, even going into the dating world. So often the young people that we work with, one might not even want to get married, or if they do, they just might feel like I can never have a good marriage. I feel doomed to repeat what my parents had. And so I'm just going to go seek out the counterfeit. I'm just going to go sleep around. I'm going to go have these casual relationships or maybe even date for fun, but I'm never going to get serious about marriage. It's like I'd mentioned, learning how to handle conflict and all the things. And so that would be the third area. So there's solutions to all those areas, by the way, but we really need to seek our own healing because underneath all of that are wounds, it's brokenness, it's trauma. And so if we can heal that brokenness and build virtues that are necessary to build, lasting love, then we can go on and build those healthy relationships, strong marriages, and holy families. And I'm convinced that that's going to transform our world. And that's what my apostolate's dead set on doing. The danger is that if we just carry that trauma, that brokenness around with us, we don't heal it, we're going to build unhealthy relationships, weak marriages, and broken families. And that's what we so often see all around us. And so we all deserve better. We want better. And so we need to really start with our own healing. Each of us has a story, right? And one way to heal is to just engage that story. And that sounds kind of odd. And what that means essentially is to just deeply reflect on that story. And to kind of think through the timeline of your life, the different people, the characters in your life, the different maybe plot twists, the bad things that happen, maybe some of the good things that happen too. And just to especially kind of reflect on your relationship with your parents. And it's not meant to demonize them in any way if you come from a broken family, but you can be honest and still honor them at the same time for being your parents. If you're honest, there are probably ways in which one or both parents harmed you, especially if the family was really broken. And so reflecting on those is really helpful because neurobiologists actually say that act of reflecting on your story in an active, constructive way actually makes your brain healthier. It increases what's called neural connectivity. So if you think of your brain as a web, By increasing neural connectivity, you increase the amount of webs in your brain, and that's one measure of brain health. It makes you healthier. And one step further is actually sharing that story with someone who can receive it in an empathetic way. So whether, again, that's a friend or a mentor, that actually makes your brain healthier, makes you more whole. And so that's a really practical thing you could do. And that was like really pivotal, because I think so often what happens is like hurt people. And, brokenness begets brokenness, divorce begets divorce. And so if we don't stand up and say, this ends with me, and I can't do that alone, like I need God's grace, but I'm certainly going to put everything that I have behind it. Unless we do that and make that determination, kind of suffer through those difficult moments and trying to build lasting love, then again, the danger is that we would fall into just repeating that cycle. But we don't have to. And God's waiting to help us if we ask him, and there's people around us who can kind of build that support structure that we need, because we can't do it alone. With any vocation, especially in marriage, you're saying yes to a future you don't know. You're obviously choosing to love the person and stay faithful to them, but you don't really know what's down the road. And we've had friends who've had kids who've had cancer, or who've lost their spouse, or just these crazy things that you would never expect. You're certainly putting a lot of trust in God's hand by saying yes to this vocation and loving, your spouse the best you can. And so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that it's risky. It is. But I heard one priest say that, when you get married, your life doesn't get easier, but it can get better. And that's what I've seen too, is there's certainly been struggle. And I think that's an important thing to talk about as well, that marriage is not some fairy tale. I think so often there's this narrative in our culture that the purpose of marriage is happiness, but the purpose of marriage is not happiness. The purpose of marriage is holiness, and obviously having kids and raising kids. But nowhere in the wedding vows is happiness promised. And that sounds super unromantic, but it's really important, because what I've seen, especially in my work, underneath almost every divorce is this belief that, consciously or not, we expect our spouse to make us perfectly happy. And when they don't, we tend to think, maybe I married the wrong person. Maybe I picked the wrong vocation, and we might even be tempted to leave. And so your marriage will suffer to the extent that you expect your spouse to make you perfectly happy. And so that's such a dangerous thing we have to watch out for. God's the only one who can make us perfectly happy. Marriage is going to be like the rest of life. There's going to be good times, and there's going to be hard times. There's going to be really joyful and beautiful times, and there's going to be times where you really struggle. And you got to expect that. Don't be fooled into thinking that if you have chemistry, if you get along well, if you have a good friendship, that you're never going to struggle. You will at some point. Some couples more than others, some sooner than others, but it's not easy. This is kind of unpopular advice, but I would say that be ready for the temptation to quit. It might take years and years. For some people, maybe it's right away. You might be tempted to walk away. In that moment, that's when we need to hold on to the promise. That's when we need to be really gritty. We need to rely on God's grace. We need to just refuse to give up, to truly live out our wedding vows, even if we don't want to, even if we don't feel like it, even if we feel like we would be quote unquote happier elsewhere. It's a real temptation. And especially in our world where divorce is such like an attractive option for a lot of people, and it's an easy option. We're even encouraged in a lot of ways to just, get divorced and start over. You'll be happier. Even in the Catholic world at times, we have to really guard against that. And so in those moments, when you struggle, seek out good resources, good friends, good people in your life who can really encourage you and help you to heal your marriage, because that's totally possible.
And where can people find you?
The website is restoredministry.com, and that's the best place. On there, you'll find there's our resources page. So we have a book. It's called It's Not Your Fault. It features 33 questions and answers on the most pressing challenges that young people from broken families face. Everything from, like I mentioned, emotional problems to relationship struggles, to trying to navigate and heal their relationship with their parents, to dealing with navigating holidays and life events, to making decisions about their future. The annulments too for Catholics, like, are we illegitimate children if our parents get annulled? Things like that. We answer those questions. So that's a book. We have a podcast. It's called Restored, Helping Children of Divorce. So you can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. And we were ranked number 18 on the divorce topic of all podcasts. And we're the only podcast for the children in that list, unfortunately. The rest are for parents, which is certainly needed, but we're the only one for the children. So I would say the podcast and the book are the place to start. We have other free resources we give away. We have like video courses, we do speaking engagements, things like that. But I would definitely probably start with the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
No, it's been good to be with you. And I just love what you're doing. Keep up the good work.